if you ask a question, make it as specific as possible. Make it as easy for someone to answer as you can, and then you're more likely to get an answer. They'll also know that you really tried in resolving it yourself by the detail you go into in how you ask the question. The other thing to realize is there's kind of what I would call more friendly places to ask questions. So for Ubuntu, for example, if you're using a Ubuntu distribution for the first time and have some issues, there are some pretty friendly forums where the mentality around that forum is to get more and more people to use Ubuntu. So they don't want to scare you away. They want to encourage you to use it. And so they tend to be much more friendly in their responses. And one of the things that is very irritating and happens to me pretty frequently is someone will ask a question on the forum that I typically keep track of and answer when I can. And they will ask the question, and then 2 hours later they'll say, "So why hasn't anybody answered my question?" And that person isn't paying me to answer their question. I'll answer it when I'm good and ready, if ever. And it's kind of this, if I think they're going to give something back to the community, I'm willing to give something to them so they can get to the point they can give back to the community. Also, with someone that's new, you want to draw them in and get them involved. And so you might give them a few free answers when they really should have read the manual or done their homework a little bit harder. But I can tell you, I can mention off several names. I don't know what their real names are. I only know their email addresses. And when they ask a question, I just hit delete because they've just completely wasted my time too much in the past. And they don't add any value to what's important to me. And so I'm not going to spend my time on it. Maybe someone else will answer it. So how not to ask a question? And as best as I could, I took these straight off of some mail lists that I've been involved in. This guy is shouting. When you use all capital letters on a mail list, that is shouting. And, we don't like to be yelled at, so I would avoid that. I tried it, and it didn't work. What should I do now? Embarrassingly enough, I just got one of those from a customer who is paying me, and so I have to really gently remind them I need a lot more detail as to what went wrong. What did you do? How far did you get? What is the error output? So, how would I respond to this? I tried it and it didn't work. What should I do now? My response would be, do something different. Right? They asked a vague question. I can't tell them anything else besides a vague answer. Would you explain H2.64 to me, please? They're just being lazy. There's lots of places you can get a lot of background on H264. And the other problem is if you start answering this question, you think, wow, I did a really good job of answering this question. Then they turn around and they ask you, well, what about this part of H264? And all of a sudden, you realize you're in this cycle where you're never going to be able to satisfy them with the answers you give. And so it's like, no, what they should ask is, can someone give me a reference to H264 information? Then I can answer the question, yeah, there's this great book, here's the title, go read that. And I'm done. I know they're not going to come back and ask me endless questions. In Perl, is there any function to delete a file? Well, clearly they didn't read the manual. It's a little bit confusing in Perl because it's called unlink instead of delete, so you can kind of understand why they had a problem. But really, an internet search would have answered that much more quickly than writing the email and wasting someone's time in answering it. So if you want to get involved in an open source community, sometimes they're really mature, they have exactly what you want, you're just going to download the application, you're going to build it, run it, and it meets your needs, and that's good. That's really what a lot of developers are trying to strive to. But in some cases, you'll find a project that isn't doing what you would hope it would do, or maybe it's a little slow and you wish it ran faster. So how do you start getting involved in this open source community? So one of them, gosh, this is the third time I've mentioned it. It must be important. Read and fix the documentation. The core developers really want to do code development if it's an open source software project. And so anything you can do around to free up their time so they can spend more time developing code will be very appreciated. Log defects. And as you start understanding the code, you can even put a proposed fix. Your fix may not be right, but they see that you're showing an effort, you're trying to learn the code, and if your fix isn't right, you're very likely to get a detailed answer on, well, I'm going to fix it this way instead, and here's why. And that'll help you to learn the code a lot better. And it also shows where more documentation is needed because there was something you got confused by that others might get confused by. This one is always really nice. When I see a newbie question be asked on a forum that I participate in, I usually like to wait, maybe half a day with the hope that someone else will respond so I don't have to. So as you get up to speed on a project and you start becoming knowledgeable on it, you're going to be able to start answering these questions as well, and the developers will clearly appreciate that. Most well-run open source projects have a roadmap of where they're going, what new features they're looking at. You can see if there's something on that roadmap that you feel qualified to do, and then talk to the core developers and say, hey, I'd like to take a shot at implementing this new feature. They'll probably give you some hints on how to do it, and then you can make a serious contribution back to the project. This doesn't happen as the first thing you do with a project. Usually you need to start a little slow and get yourself to the position where you can make a core contribution. Some of the fun is the technical debate that goes on. One of the most interesting I've read in the last 6 months was, I think it was the last 6 months, was the dialogue between the core Linux team and the Android team on how to get support for misbehaving applications into the kernel. So there's a patch on the kernel that's part of Android that's not in the core kernel because the core kernel developers don't like the approach that's being used. And it was very educational to read the conversation between the different people on why Android thought it was really important, had to do with battery life, and why the core developers didn't like it, which has to do with if you write lousy applications, that's not the kernel's fault. So it's very interesting to read that discussion. So you can join in some of that technical debate. It's a lot of fun, and it's a good way to really sharpen your skills of explaining why you think it should be done one way. And then when you really feel like you're getting close to being a core contributor, you might find out that maybe, the 1.0 version of this software used a particular paradigm or software engineering approach that is causing, say, performance problems. And you have a new idea. If we make the API different, really fundamental change that you can make it run faster. And so you can really, really start getting deeply, deeply involved with the project and steering where it goes. And one of the things that you guys have a special gift for that I certainly don't is that you can help translate the application into Spanish. And depending on where the application is being developed, that will be greatly appreciated by the core developer team. So that's something to keep in mind. It would typically be the installation and configuration guide that they're most interested in getting translated. So I want to talk a little bit about my favorite hardware. It's called the Hawk board. I love the Hawk board because it had all the IOs that I really liked. I brought one to show you. Of course, I forgot to get it out. And the Hawk board came out in 2 batches. There was version 1 batch and version